Good morning, afternoon, evening, or night. My name is Saturn and I'm a big fan of the Pokemon series. I'm here today to review the latest core entries in the series, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. But before I get on with that, I want to quickly explain my passion for the series. I first discovered this series when I was around 10 years old. I started with the Pokemon anime, but quickly moved on to the games, specifically Sun and Moon, after I finally got my own 3DS. I adored and still adore every single Pokemon game I played on that little system, so when I found out that Pokemon was coming to the Nintendo Switch, I was super excited, of course. I still have lots of love for Pokemon Sword and Shield because of that, really, but I'm not here to dwell on this entire series today. Maybe that's for another time. At this point, you might know me from my Unova video, or either of my videos on the upcoming Pokemon Legends Z-A. If you have come from those videos, hey, thanks, I really appreciate that you've stuck around for this. If you've been here even longer, an even bigger thanks because you somehow managed to make it through the teenage years of my life when I thought making content was as easy as using PowerPoint and a microphone. No scripts whatsoever. You can see that that's changed a bit now as I'm staring at my 20,000 plus word document. But hey, some of my music and art videos still hold up, even if I'm not entirely happy with a few of them a few years on. I just wanted to briefly mention here that this video was intended to come out before the Unova video, and it was also originally written about a year ago, so there are a few references to the DLC as if it's not come out, or, you know, a few references to videos that are coming soon, even though they are already on my channel. But, you know, due to time constraints and because I wanted to get that Unova video out before Pokemon Day earlier this year, yes, I know that was in February and it's now November, obviously that had to be prioritised first. Anyway, I've rambled on for long enough now. Here's my review of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Not 1 month after the release of the biggest and most exciting and new Pokemon game, Pokemon Legends Arceus, we got the reveal of the next generation of Pokemon, Scarlet and Violet. These games have had a very interesting life, even from the reveal all the way to the here and now, whereas I'm recording this, the DLC has been out for nearly a year. In this video, I'm going over the base game of Scarlet and Violet, and I'm going to talk about everything that's been improved from the previous games, what it does right on its own, but also where it falls short. This video will be split up into sections: the reveal, pre-launch information, the game's reception at launch, and then delving into the game itself, with performance, gameplay, story and characters, sound design, artistic design, and the failings of the open world. I'm not going to talk about the DLC, mainly because this video is already horrendously long and I really just need to rewrite it effectively. Alright, without further ado, let's begin. I can vividly remember where I was when Scarlet and Violet were revealed. I remember finishing up a shift at my job when the presents began, and while I was on my way home, I watched a bit of it, seeing the reveal of Alola in Pokemon Go. Once I got home, I skimmed through the presents to see if anything of note was revealed, as I was particularly confident that at most we'd just get some Legends Arceus DLC. However, I quickly realised that this was not the case and settled down at the very PC I'm currently recording this at and watched the new trailer intently. I think it's fair to say that I had mixed feelings coming out of that trailer. While I was excited for the next new Pokemon game, a feeling I'm particularly used to by now, I was slightly disturbed by the idea that we would be getting yet another new main series Pokemon game within just about a year of the previous two. Granted, one of those was developed by a second studio, but I was nervous for just how much would be brought over from Legends Arceus. And, spoilers for later on, I was right to be. I don't really remember much of the initial reveal reactions on Twitter or other social media, aside from a few concerned glances at the designs of Florian and Juliana, and somebody sorting some sort of controversy out around Sprigatito's eye. I think we all sort of held our breath just to see what was going to happen with these games. But there were things that I remember felt slightly strange even back then. Firstly, the frame rate in the trailer is atrocious. It's even worse than the final game in many ways. And one of the first screenshots showed off a Hisuian Zoroark, which took about 6 months to become available in the game after release, unless you bought the DLC without seeing so much as a frame of gameplay. But on the whole, there was a lot of hype surrounding the open world Pokemon games. It looked properly exciting, and in a lot of ways that trailer still does capture the magic of a new Pokemon game. Of course, we also had the reveals of 3 brand new Pokemon, Paldea's first partner Pokemon, Sprigatito, Fuecoco, and Quaxly. They're really good designs. You know, a lot of people really liked them back then, and even now people love them. And people were really looking forward to seeing them in gameplay, which wouldn't happen for about 4 months after this. Before we go on to discussing the subsequent trailers, I first want to go into a few more specifics on the game's reveal. That first trailer was really amazing. Game Freak and Pokemon clearly know we love theorising and seeing little details and wondering what it all means. And they lead into that heavily in this trailer. The room that the security guard walks into is full to the brim of little secrets which told us about the games, even if we didn't know it back then. As the door closes, you can see the symbols for Naranja and Yuva Academy. Team Star's logo is displayed in a frame, a sandwich is laid on a table, and if you look very closely you can see a sort of frame in the shape of the Terra symbol. And of course the subject of many YouTube theory videos, the clock going mental, implying time travel. Little did we know. It was a great reveal, and it kept us all going for months to come, because it wouldn't be another 4 months until we saw more information on the game in June, and learn a bit more about what it was actually about. As is often the case, the second trailer for the game gave us a much more detailed look into what the game was like, introducing us to the 2 professors as well as our rival, Nemona. It also showed off a handful of new Pokemon such as Smoliv and Pawmi, and was a fun insight into the Paldea region. We're also introduced to the Union Circle feature, as well as teased about the game's 3 main storylines, with a shot of Artisan Gym, the Shedder Squad base, and the Titan Orthworm while underground. I really like this trailer a lot because it doesn't show off too much of the games as to where we knew everything, but it gave us enough to tide us over for the 2-month wait for trailer 3. The trailer ends with a CGI introduction of Koraidon and Miraidon, and a small tease towards Terrastal. This has been an odd trend ever since X and Y, where instead of gameplay we get big CGI showcase of the new legendaries, and in some cases we have to wait until release to see what they actually look like in game. I remember being quite shocked by how Zamazenta looked on the back of the shield box art when I picked it up. They also changed up the logos to add in a depiction of the legendaries and 4 symbols that we're still not quite sure what they are. This also sort of acted as a tease to the importance of the Scarlet and Violet books, but to be honest, it just made me wish that we had an art book release with the game inside rather than just the standard Switch box, though obviously I knew that was never going to happen. Now, I'm not going to go over every trailer because we'd be here forever, but I did want to give a special mention to the August trailer for this game because it will go down as possibly the best trailer we've ever had for a Pokemon game. I really love the way it shows everything off, from Arven and Penny to Grusha and the Starmobile. It really teased loads of new information. I particularly like that it makes the whole experience just sound so appealing. Of course, this trailer also had the reveal of a pretty major part of the game, Terrastal and Terra Raid battles. This would be the game's gimmick, as well as confirming the return of raids from Sword and Shield. I remember being pretty excited for this, because it felt like it did more than just giving us Pokemon but big or Pokemon but good move. While I still prefer Megas, I definitely adore Terrastal. After this trailer we would see reveals like that of Grafaiai and Wiglet, as well as one more major trailer which showed off the 3 storylines. There was also the competitive play trailer, which I won't go into the major detail about, but I do have a bit of a personal attachment to that, as I was lucky enough to attend the Pokemon World Championships in London that year, and saw this trailer live. But aside from that, the trailer really didn't do much for me, as it won't if you're not interested in competitive battling. That kind of goes with the World's trailers, given that they are focused on, competitive battling. We also had the strange 15-minute long trailer with the reveal of 1 new Pokemon, but it was a super cool Pokemon, so I really don't mind. I mean, overall, it wasn't a bad year for reveals, though some of the ones that they got us excited for were a bit odd, such as the Iono and Bellibolt reveal. I remember being quite excited about that trailer before it came out, but then it came out and I felt entirely apathetic towards the whole affair. The only really interesting thing about that trailer is that as far as I can tell they've used the model of Iono from the game, but possibly up-resed a bit. I've never been a big fan of the times that they've made trailers or entire marketing campaigns just to reveal a single Pokemon, mainly because I often find I'm not all that interested in said Pokemon, such as with Wiglet or Greavard, but it does help to keep a steady stream of information without revealing too much, I suppose. The only other thing to mention is the Gimmighoul Pokemon Go crossover. I still don't like that some Pokemon are exclusive to Go, specifically Melmetal, but things like this are a lot better for me personally, especially since roaming form Gimmighoul doesn't differ in any way to chess form, other than aesthetically. Especially given that they never gave it an exclusive evolution, which would have been, even better if they had done that. But then again, another exclusive Pokemon to Pokemon Go. But oh well. I guess that's everything regarding the pre-launch information, but that's really only just the beginning. It only gets deeper from here. It wouldn't be unfair to suggest that people didn't exactly like Scarlet and Violet at launch. Not because it was a bad game, but because it was poorly made, in the sense that there were bugs and glitches literally everywhere you looked, most of which are still in the game today and can be seen in regular gameplay. Infamous glitches include the fact that the lock-on feature can look inside buildings and walls, which led to the discovery that cave floors extended into the walls, meaning that Pokemon can, and often do, spawn inside these walls. Which means that now, every time I go into a cave, I have to check inside the walls so I don't miss a shiny. You've also got the well-known music glitch. The Elite Four and Champion themes would play the first few seconds on a loop eternally in some cases. This happened to me, and it saddens me because the music for the Elite Four and Champion are amazing and I really wanted to listen to them. If you haven't played the game and are now thinking about Elite Four rematches, which have been in every single game since 1996, we'll get to that later. There was also the glitch that still exists, in which you can literally see through the floor during some battles and animations into battles. This usually happens when you're on an incline. Lucky for us, Game Freak released a patch not long after the game which had a "we're sorry but please keep reporting these bugs" message attached. Which to many read as, "We didn't have enough time to playtest, so we're having you do it." You know, it's pretty bad when I played the game about 12 hours after launch, and there was already a shopping list of bugs by the time I'd started playing. However, I think it's important to highlight that actually, most people, myself included, were adoring the game at launch. Terra raid battles were annoying, but still good fun when they worked. The story was a vast improvement over Sword and Shield, and the feel of a properly open world Pokemon game was amazing fun. So now let's delve a bit deeper into this game and analyse it with the finest tooth comb I could find. I have a lot to say about the game as a whole, and my thoughts and feelings have changed over time. So let's get into it, shall we? This game runs awfully. Truly and utterly awfully. If you thought running through Korok Forest in Breath of the Wild was bad, or thought how painfully choppy Pokemon animations were in Legends Arceus, this game is going to shock you even more thoroughly. It hardly runs at 30 FPS at the best of times, but especially when there are weather effects or NPCs around, the game can slow to a snail's pace. It would be funny if it didn't dramatically affect the gameplay to the point where battles feel like a complete drag. This game needed at least one more year in the oven, seriously. The amount of glitches and performance issues in this game is ridiculous. And I often wonder how Nintendo saw this and thought it was okay by any means. On a separate note, while battles in the game are truly horrendous, similarly to Legends Arceus, while battles now take place in the overworld, meaning that we no longer have the long drawn-out transitions to get from place to place, which is great. But they did not bring over the Legends Arceus feature of throwing a Pokemon at a wild Pokemon in order to initiate a battle, instead opting for the Let's Go and Sword and Shield method of running into a wild Pokemon to initiate. This means that for tiny Pokemon, it can be so hard to see them that you're constantly running into them. Flabébé suffers from this heavily. It also means that if you accidentally run into a Pokemon which is part of a group, you'll often find that once the battle ends, you'll be forced into another one straight away. And this can repeat for a while, because your trainer jumps so far back from where the battle takes place for seemingly no reason. I mean, in Legends Arceus you can control where your trainer was during the battle. Why do we have to social distance from them in this game? Now you could argue that this shouldn't happen too often because the surface area of the player is relatively small, right? Well, this is true, but for the most part this game wants you to ride on Koraidon and Miraidon, which more than triples the player's hitbox, and because you can't get off the Pokemon during battle, you're completely stuck until you eventually get out of that situation. And as bad as wild battles are, they do not compare to the absolute tragedy that is Terra raid battles. While the NPCs were annoying as anything and no one liked shields, max raids ran pretty well in Sword and Shield. The same can, unfortunately, not be said for Terra raids in Scarlet and Violet. They decided to iterate on the raid concept by letting people attack whenever, instead of just having to wait for everyone. This would have been a good change had the wild Pokemon not also been affected by this change. Because it is not, there are times when you are in the middle of selecting a move and the wild Pokemon will attack you, causing your menu to freeze, sometimes until after it attacks you again. This can cause a lot of frustration during raids, especially if it's a Pokemon that's already quite tough to beat, such as 7-star raid battles. They did release a raid patch, but I personally haven't seen much of any improvement, with Pokemon magically gaining health or attacking after they were very clearly defeated. It needed quite a lot more time to work out and get working properly. It's a shame that it was rushed out this quickly. I also want to use this section to talk about the graphical fidelity and animations. Starting with the graphics, the texture quality is appalling. We'll talk about the design of the textures later, but in terms of how they look in game, they've been compressed to such a high degree that they look incredibly pixelated, and it just seems really rough. It really takes you right out of the experience when you're walking through Montenevera and all of a sudden you're blasted with pixel graphic flaws. Now, to be fair, Legends Arceus also suffered with this problem, but that doesn't make it okay. It's a real shame only because the models themselves look pretty good in this game, but that's something we'll talk about in the design section. I am disappointed by how they were okay with giving us textures that looked like they were designed for the 3DS, and it seemed to only be a problem with the overworld. In terms of animations, I am pleased to say that for the most part I am pleasantly surprised, especially with the human animations. Coming from a game like Sword and Shield where Sonia's hair twirling wasn't even animated correctly, Scarlet and Violet's animations are gorgeous, especially in cutscenes. The cutscene where you choose your starter and meet Nemona looks amazing because Nemona is animated very realistically. And while we'll go more in depth with it later, this is where having the hair no longer be a block but individual strands shines the most. It allows the game to feel free and look more natural. In Sword and Shield, Beed's hair looked like it was super glued on, the way it didn't move when I kept pushing it, but in Scarlet and Violet, Nemona's hair is animated fluidly and it all comes together to look really nice. While animations don't look as nice in the overworld, I would still argue that they're a vast improvement over the 8th generation games. As for the Pokemon, the improvements seen in Legends Arceus have been carried over here, and Pokemon are animated a lot more cohesively. Instead of turning on their axis, they have proper turning animations and they all look really great. Similarly to Sword and Shield, Scarlet and Violet's gameplay is about replacing what came before rather than adding onto it. While I will always lament the loss of Mega Evolution, as it was easily the best of the gimmicks and it felt less like a gimmick and more a new step for the series, I have to admit that Terra Style is such a great stand-in. With this feature, any Pokemon can become any type, which can allow for some really interesting gameplay changes, especially in online battles. While the Terra mechanic is used in the main game, like with other mechanics before it, it goes woefully underutilised. Each gym leader will terrestrialize their final Pokemon, but that Pokemon is always of a different type to their gym type, and they terrestrialize it to become their gym's type. This, to me, at least, is a shame, a real shame. I think if they had their signature Pokemon terrestrialize into a different type instead, that would have been way more fun. For example, Grusha's Titan terrestrializes to become Water type, Larry's Kamala becomes a Flying type, Tulip's Spathra becomes a Fairy type. Just adding that slight extra difficulty to the battles would make them far more fun. After the first one, you realise that they'll all just terrestrialise to their gym's type, so you can just keep the super effective Pokemon of choice in. If they did it the other way, you wouldn't know which type you'd be up against, meaning you'd have to either switch out during the battle or try to succeed in a potentially unfortunate matchup. The same goes for the Elite Four. I mean, they at least terrestrialise their aces, but they all use dual-type Pokemon, so even just terrestrialising to the other type would have been more interesting. This is just sort of remedied in the Academy Ace tournament, if only because the instructors aren't type experts, minus hassle and time. Except the instructors only terrestrialise to one of the Pokemon's base types rather than something more interesting. The only time that Terra Style is used to make battle more interesting in the base game is during the battle against Iono, the third gym leader, where she terrestrializes her Mismagius to the electric type, but it has Levitate as an ability. I genuinely can't tell if that was intentional though, because that's the only time that a battle was made more interesting in that way. I thought that maybe, similar to Sword and Shield, from the third gym leader onwards, they might do a little bit more, but no. Of course, Mega Evolution, Z-Moves, Dynamax, and the Strong and Agile styles do not return from their respective games. While I'm neither here nor there on Z-Moves or Dynamax, I think the Strong and Agile styles and the whole turn system from Legends Arceus was far too interesting to be a one-time thing, and really gave battles a new element of strategy. I was hoping that that system will return in Scarlet and Violet, and I'm now really hoping that it will return in Z2A, so we can use it in more proper trainer battles. I can imagine it would make for one hell of a champion showdown. Going forward, I think Pokemon should stop adding gimmicks each game. I get why they do it, but they're just going to run out sooner or later, and I think that by iterating on what they already have would work just fine. Personally, I hope that Pokemon games bring 3 gimmicks forward and continue to iterate on those. As I mentioned previously, Megas and the Strong and Agile style are two, but I also really want terrestrializing to come back as well. It's just a really fun mechanic, and I would love to see a future where it can be used in tandem with Mega Evolution to make for some seriously tough battles. But for this to work, Game Freak would have to really use Terrastyle in a way that Scarlet and Violet didn't, and just make it better in general. Now, let's talk about boss battles in this game. There are a number of bosses, not counting trainers. These would be the 5 Titan Pokemon as well as the 5 Starmobiles. These basically function as totem Pokemon from Sun and Moon, but without the SOS mechanic. I personally didn't find these fights particularly impressive, as they just felt a bit too basic and too easy, which is a problem with it within itself. Many people have memories of being swept by the Totem Lurantis in Sun and Moon, or having trouble with Totem Ribombee in the Ultra games. I know I can attest to that. But I haven't heard a single person talk about the difficulties of the Titan battles. And that is because, in all honesty, they're ridiculously easy. An easy way to make them harder would have been to reintroduce the SOS mechanic specifically for those battles, as I can see why you wouldn't for the whole game. But you could have had it just so the Titans could call in other Pokemon, either of their species, or typing, or even just Pokemon found in that area, and it would have made the battle 10 times more interesting. You could also have had the second phase of the battle cause them to terrestrialize into a random typing, given that the Herba Mystica kind of feel disconnected from the rest of the game's story, so tying them in with Terrastyle would have made it more cohesive. But we'll talk more on that in the story section. The Starmobile battles are a lot tougher, mainly because you've already fought a team of Pokemon, as well as the fact that you're on your own, whereas in Titan battles you have Arven to assist you, almost reversing the SOS mechanic. The Starmobile battles are actually a lot of fun, and I love how they all have unique moves and animations. It's the type of boss battle you wouldn't expect from Pokemon, because it's a form of Revavroom that you can't obtain for yourself. Unless they do that in the DLC, but obviously now that we've got both DLCs, we know they haven't, but you never know, knowing Pokemon. While similarly to my grievances with the gym battles, the Starmobile Revavrooms all change to become the type of the trainer you're facing. I think it fits better here, as fighting Fight with Revavroom with the same typing would have gotten old pretty quickly. The only change I would have made to the Starmobile battles is more a change to the battle that comes before. I would have had the Team Star bosses all terrestrialize their Pokemon just to then add a bit of extra challenge. On the topic of Team Star battles, let's talk about the Team Star bosses. There are 5 of them, each of them specialising in their own type. I really like this, as it's a great fusion of the traditional gym battles and the added Starmobile battles adds in an element of the Totems and Titans. It feels a bit like it let Omori have his cake and eat it too, and that really comes across in these, as these are by far the most fun battles in the game. I think the feel with all the music and everything really helps that as well. And I love how the bosses all have very distinct personalities and roles within the group, as well as all of them feeling like they have justified reasons for being part of Team Star. But I'm kind of encroaching on the other sections of the video now. My only real complaint is that in the post-game rematches with the bosses they don't use the Starmobiles, which I think is a great shame. Overall, however, the Team Star boss battles are loads of fun. But with every bit of fun there comes a downside. The Team Star battles before the boss battles are less fun. They have a great concept, but the execution is sorely lacking. I never felt under threat from the barrage of grunts all attacking at once. Their Pokemon don't start fighting mine, and I feel this would have worked a lot better in a game like Legends Arceus, where the player can also take damage, adding that extra risk. I also feel that auto battles just don't work as well as they should, and often find my Pokemon won't lock onto another Pokemon, and then won't respond if I press R again. This is probably another one of those things that could have been fixed with a bit more time in the oven, but because it's part of the finished product that I'm playing, I feel like I shouldn't have to point out where this game's shortcomings are. Now, let's touch on the gym challenge. I'm glad that they are getting more creative with the challenges, especially when compared to Sword and Shield. But I don't know if it's just me, but I'd almost rather they felt more like dungeons in a Zelda game, with puzzles to complete and trainers to fight, eventually reaching the top where you fight the gym leader. Now, of course, this is a bit of an odd thing to have rather than the new system they're going down, but actually, gyms in games up to Gen 6 are kind of a bit like that already, but they're just not as big as I'd like them to be. Hey, you could even throw in some callbacks to past games and have some previous characters like gym leaders and Elite Fours act as mini-bosses. Say a Dark-type gym that has Grimsley show up and you have to fight him halfway through. That'll be fun. But let's talk about what we've actually got in Scarlet and Violet, gym by gym. Starting with Casey's gym. I'm not a massive fan of the olive roll minigame, mostly because the physics on the olive are completely whack. It bounces all over the place and never where you want it to go. But it is creative, I'll give you that. Brassius' gym challenge is one of the better ones. I actually think trying to find Sunflora mixed in with all the Sunflora statues is a really fun idea, and I like how you have to battle some of them and chase others. I also really appreciate that it gets you to really know the town of Artisan really well. But obviously that's a bit of a shame that the frame rate dips with the more Sunflora you get. Iono's gym challenge is quite fun, but you need more NPCs around to make Clavel blend into the background more. Kofu's gym challenge is pretty basic and not hard to win, but it gets the job done. I'd like to know what the actual gym challenge for his gym is when he hasn't left his wallet at home though. Larry's gym challenge is basically the Opal Raihan strategy of just fight 3 trainers, but with the added element of having to gather clues and order the right dish. I think it's a really neat concept, and I also like how the trainers are spaced out around Medali. Again, like Brassius' gym, you get to know Medali quite well, whereas in Lopal and Raihan's gym, you're stuck in an enclosed space and they just show up. Rhyme's gym challenge is just fight 3 trainers in a row. It's not good, it's particularly lazy, and is just the Opal and Raihan method, but this time without the added interest that Larry's one had. You cannot introduce the gym with a rap battle and then just have us do 3 double battles. It's literally just copy-pasted from Raihan's gym, slap a ghost type filter on top. Tulip's gym challenge is a lot more fun, if incredibly simple. I like it because it uses one of the game's other characters, Dendra, the battle tactics instructor from Yuva or Naranja Academy. And also it's just nice to have an extra little bit of a mini-game involved, even if it is very simple. Finally, Grusha's gym challenge just reminds me of Wii Fit. But it can make your Miraidon shiny temporarily, so hey, that's good in my books. For clarification, that's a bug, it should not do that. But I will say that it is a really fun gym challenge, aside from, the obvious glitching. But I just felt a bit disappointed about the gym challenges as a whole, as they just feel a bit basic. Now, let's talk about the Academy itself and the lesson system. I didn't really know what to expect going in, but while it is effectively just a cutscene with a question in the middle to make sure you're not just mashing A, it has some really fun tidbits of information. However, the tests are a bit pointless. Oh, and it gave us Professor Gibble, so it's a 10 out of 10. I wish we could do more interacting with the instructors, but it is nice that we get to have a few conversations with them outside of the classroom. Of course, it also helps to set up for the Academy Ace tournament as you get to battle your instructors there in the post-game. On the topic of the Academy Ace tournament, let's talk about the rematches. After beating the main story, Gita tasks you with going back to each gym and having a champion level battle against each gym leader. Now I was hopeful that, like the Team Star Boss rematches, you'd be able to do these once a day, but alas no. However, they have now been added to the Indigo Disc, so if you want to pay an extra 30 quid for gym leader rematches, go ahead. As I've already mentioned, like Mustard and Peony in Sword and Shield, you can rematch the Team Star bosses once a day, the only downside being that they no longer have their Starmobiles. You can refight instructors and rivals anytime in the Academy Ace tournament, but unfortunately every trainer uses the basic Academy Ace tournament theme, which, while great, does get a bit boring after a while. And also, some of the original themes for the different characters are fantastic, and I would have loved to hear them. Now there is one massive missing rematch in these games. A set of rematches which have existed since Red and Green, which I alluded to earlier. Elite Four and Champion rematches are not in this game. As you can imagine, this is incredibly disappointing. Technically, you can still fight the Hassel and Gita in the Academy Ace tournament, but it's not the same, and Rika, Poppy and Larry are all absent. I am hoping that Elite Four rematches are added in some form by the DLC. Obviously they were added in the same way as the gym leader rematches were, but it just still feels a bit disappointing. I get that Game Freak probably thought that the tournament was a good alternative, but when is it bad to have options, I can't imagine it would have taken them much to re-add them in, given that it took until Sun and Moon for the Elite Four to recognise you as a returning trainer when you fought them in the post-game. I get that the Elite Four have a bit more of a family vibe to them in this game that really works for the first time. But there's no reason it can't work in subsequent battles. Or maybe actually giving them unique rooms would be nice, but we'll come back to that. Now let's talk about how you traverse the open world. During the first section of this game, you gain the ability to ride on a Koraidon or Miraidon. This acts as the bike of the game. But you know, I never remember the bike being a mandatory feature before. I'm not really a big fan of the Koraidon and Miraidon running around thing. Not because of the design or because Pokemon Bike not funny or anything like that. Really, it's because it means you zoom through this open world so quickly. In Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, you have a massive map to explore, and you want to do most of it on foot because you'll often get distracted and want to go off the beaten path. You have the option to use a horse, and if you beat Monk Mazcotia in Breath of the Wild, then you even have a motorbike, but I still find myself spending most of the time in those games walking. I wish I could say the same for Scarlet and Violet, because when I did decide to stop using Miraidon for a while, I noticed everything so much more. But because Miraidon is used for everything from climbing to gliding to swimming, it becomes less of an option and more of a necessity. The game also clearly wants you to be on your Pokemon at all times, when because you're not, the music changes to become dull and slow. It's a massive shame, because I'm sure I would have preferred to go through this adventure on foot, but I constantly felt I shouldn't because I felt like I had to build up some sort of bond with my Miraidon. Personally, it's too forced for my liking. What I also don't like is that Miraidon or Koraidon get more power as you progress throughout the game. One thing I adore about Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild is that you can literally go anywhere, whenever. You have the ability to climb and swim, and it just depends on if you have enough stamina, and even then there are workarounds. By arbitrarily locking progression to Titan battles, it just feels a bit closed off, if that makes any sense. I'll talk about this more later, but one example I have is that there is an area in the game, in the South Province, which you cannot get to without getting the ability to climb. Now I thought that there was maybe a reason for this, but unfortunately there's nothing there. There was just more of the same stuff found everywhere else in that part of the map. The falling in this game is a bit strange, as it just takes a while to happen, almost like there's less gravity, or should I say gravity, and to be honest with you, it feels quite jarring. Not to mention that they included 2 safety buffers in case you accidentally fall off first. Firstly, you have to actively attempt to fall off twice if you're trying to fall intentionally, which could get very annoying very quickly, in my opinion. And then, even when you do, they present you with the better alternative option, that being a button that takes you back up before you fell. The second of those options just makes so much more sense, and I think they could have removed the first one altogether, as they practically serve the same purpose. Going back to the gravity discussion, I hate to say it, but that's not the only time that I felt like these games' controls weren't very precise. It's quite strange, really. It feels like there's a momentary delay whenever I move the joystick, especially when I'm not riding Miraidon. And when turning around, it seems to take longer than it really should. And that goes for when you're both on and off the sentient bike. It's a far cry from the precise controls that we saw in Legends Arceus that were far clearer and easier to use properly. I don't hate the controls per se, but they could have been optimised far better. Moving on to slightly more precise control discussions, the climbing in this game is horrible. I admit fully that I wasn't a fan of it in Legends Arceus either, as Sneasler would just grab onto everything within a 10-mile radius, but in this game it's somehow worse, as it's harder to attach yourself to something you want to climb, and can be very difficult to remove yourself once on. It's just a pain and can really frustrate me when I play these games, especially given that sometimes Miraidon will just suddenly invert its climbing controls. Really helpful, thanks Miraidon. The auto battles have also proven to be a bit of a pain, as they often don't register with the Pokemon the first time I press the R button, so I have to wait a while, then try again and hope for the best. It's just a little bit of an extra pain to do, and it's just an extra grievance that I wish I didn't have. We'll talk more about the way that the world is designed later, but I just wish there was a bit more cohesion in the traversal methods and just making it easier to get around the world in general, because some parts of the game can feel really claustrophobic. Now, I don't want to spend this entire video comparing this game to Legends Arceus, but the removal of the throwing a Pokeball to catch a Pokemon without battling it system is honestly really upsetting. It was a lot of fun and made Pokemon catching a more exciting and dynamic experience, especially with the feedback that you get when the Pokeball hits the Pokemon. I think it would have worked quite well in Scarlet and Violet if done properly. Also, being able to choose which Pokemon to send into battle in Legends Arceus was a great concept, and I think that, along with a bit more of that game's DNA, being brought over to Scarlet and Violet, that would have been amazing. Personally, I think the camera angle used in Legends Arceus helped to ground the game a lot more, and I would have liked to see that utilised in this game as well. From an accessibility standpoint, I would love to see the shiny sparkles and sound come back, as it made it so much easier to tell when you'd found a shiny, compared to these games. One of my more recent shinies in Paldea, a Smoliv, took me ages to work out whether or not it was even shiny, so a bit of added help would be nice. Pokemon battles in general have the same usual feeling that they have always had, this time with added Terra style, but nothing else that really changes up that classic formula. Could be a lot worse, but it could also be a lot better. I think it may be time to take a few serious changes to the way the battles function nowadays, but maybe that's just the way that my brain is working as I'm getting older. Character customization has taken a major step forward, but also a major step backwards, as while we finally have proper customization, such as eye shape, lip shape, and now anyone can have any hairstyle, clothes, or makeup, we ended up losing much of the customization we've grown accustomed to, as now there are only 4 sets of main outfits, all of which being school uniforms. Yes, that number grows to 10 with the DLC that we know of. I can't actually remember what it is now. It is actually a lot more, but it's not more than school uniforms now, really. But it is still pitiful compared to recent entries, and we really shouldn't have to pay an extra £30 for worse customization than in Legends Arceus, Sword and Shield, Sun and Moon, or even X and Y. That being said, I love the concept of going to different shops with different types of accessories. It's a lot more realistic than in previous entries. Up to this point, I've not had to mention the battle design because on the whole they're pretty smooth in Scarlet and Violet. Though I don't know what you would do to make basic turn-based combat be clunky, so that's unfortunately not the compliment I want it to be. However, there is one place where they messed up so badly that even after 2 years of various patches, I dread this part of Scarlet and Violet. Terra raid battles. I'll grant you that in concept they're far better than their predecessors, Max raid battles, but by comparison they feel a lot less unfair and more like a fun challenge. However, they're optimised incredibly poorly. There are times where I get stuck not being able to do anything for ages, just watching as the time goes down and waiting for the enemy to attack. I've had the game randomly heal the raid boss without a reason, and it's just not very fun. Again, in concept Terra raids are an upgrade, but in execution they bring the battle system down. I now briefly want to touch on difficulty. This game is far too easy. Like seriously, way too easy. I know that it's for kids, but when this is the same series as Ultra Necrozma and Cynthia, we can have a few more challenging moments. Geeta is laughable as my Cerulege just sweeps pretty much her entire team, and all the gym battles could have been more difficult. This was the first game where I really felt that the whole thing of having characters specialise in a type is wearing a bit thin. Having characters instead go for themes which might tie into types might be a good alternative going forward. For example, Ortega might use cute Pokemon instead of just fairy types, Brassius might use artistic Pokemon like Smeargle and Grafaiai. With a small change like that, and giving each boss and trainer a full team, because it's not hard, it would be easy enough to do, and I'm sure it wouldn't make the game too challenging. Still, I guess that's growing up for you. I'm an adult now, and I'm not exactly the target demographic, but that's a topic for another time. In previous sections, I've spent a lot of time praising the game, but also a lot of time complaining. In this section, however, I'll probably sound like I'm gushing about it, because this is, for me, easily the best part of the game. Now this section ties quite nicely into both the sound and art design sections, so I may end up adding a bit of those in here as well, to a lesser extent, the gameplay. Oh, and also, spoiler warning, I will not be holding back anything, so if you haven't played Scarlet and Violet before, I highly recommend going in blind and then finding out, what I think about it later on. The game's premise is split up into 3 different stories, each represented by a different rival character. Victory Road is represented by Nimona, your new neighbour, and a champion-ranked trainer. Starfall Street is represented by Penny, who's a timid girl who you meet when you first get to Mesagoza, but you learn has an interesting past with Team Star. And the Path of Legends is represented by Arven, who seems like a pretty insignificant character when you first meet him, but he quickly defies that notion. The beginning of the game sees you moving into a new house in Paldea, meeting Director Clavel and Nimona, and then choosing your first partner Pokemon. From there, Nimona shows you the way to the school, while teaching you a number of handy tips for any trainer to know along the way, including giving you your first taste of a Terra-style battle before you get into Mesagoza. Along the way, you meet Miraidon or Koraidon and begin to form a bond with them. Once in Messagoza, you meet Jacques and reunite with Clavel, who introduces you to Professor Churro or Sada, depending on the version. It's a pretty standard premise for a Pokemon game, to be honest, but it has some differences that are good to call out. The school premise acts as a nice way for you to get to know some of the characters who will be important later on in your journey, such as Hassel or Rhyfort. It also gives you a way to learn more about the game in depth, with lore in the history class, learning about the regional variants in languages class, and of course Pokemon biology and shinies in biology. It's a fun way to get to know your teachers and learn more about the games while you're at it. I'm glad it's optional though, because I feel that some people wouldn't enjoy that as much. And also, all the details are quite surface level, so the more you know about the series, the less important it is. The opening section of the game also allows you to begin to understand some of the characters' motivations. Once the game lets you roam around a little bit and escape the tutorials, you're free to go wherever you want besides Area 0. By the time you leave Messagoza, you've already been introduced to all 3 plot lines and are free to choose one or do a mix of them all, which I highly recommend doing a mix, unless you want to be overleveled very quickly. We'll go over each story individually and then talk about the endgame afterwards. Starting with the story thread that has the least story, Victory Road. This is basically the Sword and Shield storyline of just going to fight the gyms, and every so often your rival will give you a battle. You do meet all of the Elite Four on this path as well as the top champion Geeta. You also greatly strengthen your bond with Nemona, as well as getting to know all 8 gym leaders. There really isn't much to it besides that. The Elite Four segment at the end was really good though. All of the Elite Four have really good chemistry, and the writing of that section is really fun. I really appreciate that they all have unique personalities, with Rika being the cool one, Poppy being excitable and fun, Larry being disinterested, and Hassel being overly emotional. It's just a really neat take on the Elite Four as a concept. As for Geeta, I do appreciate the battle, but the thing is, after Sword and Shield, where we've really got to know Leon as a character, it does feel a bit anticlimactic that we don't really have any bond with Geeta. However, the final Nemona fight easily makes up for that. The music, the feel, all of it. It's just like the entire game has built up to that battle. Next up, let's talk about Starfall Street. Around the map there are 5 Team Star bases, where the bosses of Team Star hang out with their grunts. Before taking on each one, you meet with a character called Clive, who is definitely not Direct Clavel, and he helps you learn a bit more about the Team Star from a lore perspective. After beating each Team Star boss, we see a cutscene about why they joined Team Star and the preparation for Operation Starfall. It really adds to the flavour of the team and makes each character feel real and not just like a blank slate whose entire personality and role is to be an admin of the evil team. Not even my favourite character in the series, Saturn, has much of any personality to speak of, except in the anime, which is where my name comes from, fun fact. We kind of started to see this change beginning in Sun and Moon with Plumeria, but it feels fully realised here, as each of the Team Star bosses have their own personalities, and their stories may even continue into the DLC, as we see a shot of Giacomo in the recent trailer. Note, now that the DLC has come out, I'm happy to say that we definitely did get a bit more with them, though it would have been nice to have even more. The ending of that story is really something. You get back to the academy ready to face Cassiopeia in a battle, but before you can, you end up having a battle with Clavel. Then, once you've defeated him, you go to the Battle Corp where it is revealed that Cassiopeia is, in fact, Penny. You have a proper battle in which uses 6 evolutions, or as they're now officially known, VVs. I love this battle so much. The theme is a total banger, and it feels so climactic simply because the music is driving the intensity to the max, when in fact you're simply facing 6 of the fluffy, cute, popular Pokemon, 2 of which, her first and her ace, are in fact my 2 favourite Pokemon, so I can say with certainty that Penny has got good taste in Pokemon. The cutscene afterwards, where the Team Star bosses finally meet Cassiopeia in person, is really heartfelt, and really shows the connection she has with these people who she'd only met online previously. I think it really helps take the edge off the fact that we already knew that Penny was going to be the boss of Team Star, basically since she was revealed. I also really like the tidbit in the postgame where it's revealed that the league points that Penny gives you for beating the Team Star bosses were obtained by hacking into the Pokemon League. Nice job there, Penny. Down with the rich. The final story thread has the most story to give, and that is the Path of Legends. The story starts out with you and Arven setting off to search for the Herba Mystica, which are legendary ingredients that have been sought after for years, which supposedly come from deep within Area 0. Guarding each Herba Mystica is a Titan Pokemon. The Titans are all giant and have stat boosts, similar to Totem Pokemon. But here, Instead of calling allies to help you take them on, you take it on with 2 trainers, as Arven gives you a hand with his own Pokemon. After defeating each Titan, you are treated to a cutscene of the player and Arven sharing a sandwich before Miraidon or Koraidon decide they want a bite too. And good thing they get one, as each time they do, they unlock a new hidden ability, such as the ability to jump higher, swim, or glide. After the first Herba Mystica, you leave, but Arven stays behind, calling out a Pokemon that we don't see. After the second Herba Mystica, Arven introduces us to his partner Pokemon, Mabosstiff. Mabosstiff had been seriously injured trying to protect Arven, and had pretty much been incapacitated ever since. But with each Herba Mystica, Mabosstiff slowly gets better, and the cutscenes are the most heartbreaking and yet heartwarming things ever, as it starts with Mabosstiff opening his eyes, then being able to speak, well, cry, and then try to stand before the final cutscene where Arven pretty much gives up. Mabosstiff then pricks up its Pokeball in its mouth and gives it back to Arven, now being restored back to full health. Arven's reactions are written so well, and the cutscenes feel so natural that it genuinely makes me cry even just thinking about it. I know that if something like this were to happen to about either of my pets, I would have done everything I could to get them back to full health. It's honestly one of the most heartwarming stories in a Pokemon game, and is easily one of the best written. Arven is simply the best written character in the series, better than Lily by a mile, and absolutely removing N from the competition. Though I don't bring up those 2 characters for no reason, however, as Arven shares a trait with both of them. Awful parents! We learn pretty early on that Arven is the son of Professor Chiro and Sada. Depending on which one you pick, one of the professors left him and his other parent, and the other went to study in Area Zero. Arven spent most of his life all on his own, with just Mabosstiff for company. I think Arlo put it best when he talked about how Arven's interests don't just come from him liking something, but often from the fact that he had to learn how to do those things on his own, because he didn't have a parent to teach him or help him with it. I genuinely love Arven's story, because it goes from being something that seems a bit of a last-minute thought, to being the connecting thread that brings together the 3 storylines. So let's talk about that endgame, huh? The final story thread of the game is called The Way Home. This has a couple of meanings. For Miraidon, it's back to Area Zero, which is where it came from, to some extent. And for Arven, he's finally going to see his parent, after being absent for his whole life. And it is incredible. You have the 4 main characters to start with, Arven, Nemona, Penny, and you. You all meet in Zero Gate, and you can kind of tell that the other 3 aren't exactly fond of one another, but you decide to stick it out, and all of you get on the back of your Miraidon or Koraidon, and glide down into Area Zero. Once you all arrive, your legendary Pokemon hides itself away for an unknown reason, and from there, you begin your descent into the depths of Area Zero. I love this endgame. The music for Area Zero is just amazing, especially the first time you hear it, and the way that the dialogue plays as you're running down is a great addition. I wish that we got a bit more of that in the Pokemon series. Now at this point in the game, you have no idea what to expect, as you've only encountered 1 Paradox Pokemon. One of the Titans you faced in the Path of Legends quests was either a Great Tusk or Iron Treads, depending on your game, and seeing it for the first time is such a big whoa moment. Especially in Violet, as the Pokemon looks so different from anything you're used to. It's so different and very slightly terrifying in many ways. As you descend into Area Zero with your friends, you come across more Paradox Pokemon, including either an ancient Jigglypuff or a futuristic Delibird, and an ancient Amoonguss or future Haryana. They all look so alien, or at least they do in Violet, because despite looking more similar to their contemporary counterparts, having a Pokemon made entirely out of steel is quite a terrifying thought, because it hardly seems likely that that would be a natural evolution. Instead, it calls into question the idea of human intervention and experimentation of Pokemon in the future. Now, I might be going a bit too far with this, but as a certified Doctor Who fan, the idea of human intervention ending in cyborg creatures is something I am more familiar with, and the horror aspect of which has led to the Cybermen becoming my favourite monsters in the Whoniverse. So the idea of that happening to Pokemon terrifies me, especially considering how hostile the Iron Pokemon are towards the player. In any case, as you descend Area Zero, you find different laboratories, which each have notes from Professor Churo or Sada inside. You learn a lot more about their backstory and get hints that there is more to the professors than meets the eye. Once you finally get down to Zero Lab, you finally meet the professor. Except, they're not really the professor. Unfortunately, in a very tragic accident, Professor Churro and Sada died years ago, and this is an AI reconstruction built to continue their research and protect the time machine found within the lab. When I saw that time machine, I was taken aback. I would be highly surprised if the designers hadn't taken cues from the TARDIS console when designing this place, and it has a feel of pure wonder and terror at the same time. It's when the Professor tells you that they cannot control their own actions, as they want to shut off the time machine but cannot go against Sada and Shuro's programming. That moment really struck me, as it wasn't the usual Pokemon trope of good person is actually bad. Instead, it's deeper, having a character who wants to be good but is physically incapable of it. The scene where they literally beg you to defeat them, opening a portal to the past or future as a Master Ball drops into their hands before they throw it onto the battlefield, is genuinely stunning. And the music that plays for the battle will go down as one of the best pieces of music in a Pokemon game. The scope of this battle is terrifying, as you realise you're fighting for the future of the world's safety against an AI which is programmed to have no sympathy or compassion. On a personal level for me, it fits so well because it tied in perfectly with all of the Cyberman and, Hooniverse connections I was seeing. The ending to this game genuinely feels like a Doctor Who episode in that regard. It was just incredible and is probably the most memorable battle I've ever had in a Pokemon game. But of course it couldn't end there. Much like Volo in Legends Arceus and Eternatus in Sword and Shield, there is a final battle. Miraidon versus Miraidon or Koraidon versus Koraidon. Your Miraidon or Koraidon finally unlocks its full potential and engages battle mode, as Sada and Churros do the same. While I don't feel the fight is as climactic as it could be, especially given the music felt more like a theme you'd hear earlier in the game, in fact it took a lot of cues from the Kahuna battle theme from Sun and Moon, with the Miraidon and Koraidon transformation sequence literally having the same motif as the Z Crystal Obtain theme, but I'll come back to that in the sound design section. The ending of this game was such a properly heartbreaking sequence, as Arven learns that his parent died years ago, and that all that was left was an AI, which is why he hadn't seen his parent in so long. After defeating Sada and Churro one final time, they open up a portal to the past or future and go through it, and claiming that to be where they belong. As much as I know it's never going to happen, a DLC where we can follow them through into what that world would be amazing. Obviously, we've now had our DLC for Scarlet and Violet, and I think Scarlet and Violet are now long forgotten in terms of the way the Pokemon is going with Z2A. But I would love to see a continuation of the Professor's story in the future. The story ends with the four of you travelling back to Mesagoza with Miraidon or Koraidon. And then the credits roll, and Pokemon ends this wonderful finale to their game with, for some awful reason, Ed Sheeran. I love the credits themes in every single Pokemon game. Why they felt the need to use some pop song here, I will never understand. I will never understand it. But alas, while that does dampen it a bit, the endgame experience was overall the most exciting and adventurous Pokemon has ever gotten. It felt like the Sun and Moon and Ultra stories had been fully realised, but this time using time instead of space. It is interesting how much Pokemon games have relied on that duality of time and space ever since Diamond and Pearl, but that's a video on its own, to be honest. What a story, am I right? Alright, now that I'm done being blown away by the story, it's time to talk about the characters. Let's start off with the most developed characters, those being the rivals. I hate to constantly compare this game to Sword and Shield, because they are very different and both have their strengths and weaknesses, but in Sword and Shield we had a rival trio who encompassed the three different types of rival we've had in the past. The friendly neighbour, the mean one, and the edgy one. We sort of start out with this in Scarlet and Violet too, but instead of being too tied down to those archetypes, they get to be fleshed out and become their own characters, all of whom feel very developed. It really does feel like what Sword and Shield was going for has been fully realised in these games. Nemona is a fun character who loves to battle, but sometimes to a fault, as she won't recognise when it's not appropriate to battle you. Penny is an introvert who eventually opens up to the player after getting to know them. She's a really fun character overall. Arven is one of my favourite characters not just in this game, but in the series as a whole. He's just such a deep character and feels like a real person and a real friend for the player at the end. The two definitely spend a lot of time together now, that's for sure. Now for the Team Star bosses. As I mentioned earlier, they are all really well developed and fleshed out, and they all have their own reasons for being part of Team Star, and all have a bit of a tragic backstory. If I were to rank them, I would probably have Mela last, just because I didn't feel she left as much of an impression on me, then Eri for no particular reason, Then Giacomo, because he's a musician. I love the fact that he composed the Team Star music in the universe. Then it's Atticus, because I think he's a really fun character and he's also super pretty. But the winner, in my completely biased opinion, is Ortega for a number of reasons. 1. He's a willing fairy-type boy, which is for a first for the series. 2. His design is great. 3. I love his comments about the player before the battle. And 4. He's so queer-coded that he just appeals to me. And 5. We've got 3 traders in this game who honestly make me feel so much more comfortable with my own personal situation, who's being a guy who's more interested in feminine things, and he's one of them. Honestly, I'm thinking of Grusha. I'm trying to work out who the third one is, but I wrote this in the script a year ago. I'm sure it was there somewhere. Anyway, now the gym leaders. These guys don't have that much development, but I do really like the way that they all have jobs outside of being gym leaders as well. I'm not going to rank them, but I will give my thoughts on each of them. Katie being a baker is really fun, and she just adds a lot of variety to bug trains. And I think that's nice to have a few different, varieties in there. Brassius is an artist and is basically just Hassel's boyfriend, and I love him for it. 10 out of 10. I thought I was going to be going to hate Ino when she was first revealed, but she actually ended up being loads of fun and a character I can really get behind. I like her having all these different catchphrases, and again, she's the only character to use Terra style in an interesting way. Kofu is great. While we have had a water-type chef before in Seabold, Kofu has such a wildly different personality that it doesn't matter in the slightest. I think he's great fun and can be a bit silly, which is great. And I'm really hoping that when Kofu is inevitably added to Pokemon Masters, we get some great dynamics between him and Seabold. Larry is everyone's favourite person, I think. He's just such a funny character because he's so clearly not interested, but because Geeta tells him he has to, he does as he's told. I think that's why it's so funny that he shows up again as an Elite Four member later on. We've had trainers return as Elite Four members from earlier points in the game before, but this is the first time it's had a seriously hilarious reason behind it. Rhyme is a great character just because she doesn't fit that stereotypical demographic for a rapper. She's really fun to watch and her design slaps as well. If I was ranking the gym leaders, Tulip would probably be the lowest, simply because I barely know anything about her. She has a makeup line and specialises in psychic types, but that's about it. You don't have nearly as much flavour as with the other gym leaders. Finally, there's Grusha. He is my favourite gym leader in this game, as could probably be guessed after what I said about Ortega. I also just really love his personality, as he comes off as very shy and cute from his design, but he's more about being cool rather than anything else. From an overall standpoint, the gym leaders in this game have quite a lot of personality, but because you only see them during the gym battle, it's hard to get to know them. In Pokemon Black and White, for example, you often get to meet the gym leaders before battling them, such as with Drayden, who is the mayor of Opelucid City, Clay, who helps you take on Team Plasma, Berg, who also helps you take on Team Plasma, and Skylar, who you travel to Celestial Tower with. Even in a game like Sword and Shield, most of the gym leaders are met before you go into the gym. Milo's Wooloo, tackling you, having to find Nessa by the lighthouse, meeting Kabu in Galamine number 2, Opal's multiple interactions, as you go on that path, meeting Raihan after Gym 3, and for Pierce, who doesn't get met until the battle, you pretty much spend the rest of the game with him, and he has a fantastic personality. I would have liked this same level of interactivity with the Paldean gym leaders, but I'm guessing that because everything happens in a non-linear fashion, it would have been harder to do. But while I'm here, let's make a quick example of what they could have done. So you have arrived at Glaciado Gym, ready to take on Grusha's icy Pokemon. But he's not there. He's gone to look for his little Sotodle. Before you can take on his gym challenge, you should search Glaciado Mountain and try to find him. It would just have added a little bit more flavour to the game and give you a chance to get to know these characters. I know that they'll be re-invited to Blueberry Academy, but again, you should not have to pay an extra £30 to get to know characters properly, and while it did add a lot for them, it wasn't so much that I feel like we know far more about them at this point. And I just want to point out that while it is to a far lesser extent, we did also get to see the gym leaders again in Sword and Shield's DLC, so it's not as novel as a concept. Now, let's talk about the Elite Four. In Paldea, the Elite Four are Rika, Poppy, Larry, and Hassel. I've already touched on these guys' characters in the story section about Victory Road, but there is honestly quite a lot to say. These guys are easily the most fleshed out Elite Four members. Even Rika and Poppy, who you only meet once or twice before arriving at the Pokemon League. Unlike previous Elite Four, these are trainers who you get to know just through their interactions with you in the Pokemon League. It works really well as well. that if you've been following the art course at the Academy, you've gotten to know Hassel quite well, and you've already gotten to know Larry through your gym battle in Medali. Rika specialises in ground-type Pokemon, and is definitely a different style than your previous ground-type specialists. She's confident, she's very cool, and acts as the person who assesses you to see if you're worthy of taking on the Elite Four. Her personality contrasts perfectly with her signature Pokemon Clodsire, and I personally think it's hilarious, as Clodsire is the perfect Pokemon for her for that very reason. Poppy is a Steel-type trainer, and a good one at that. She's by far the youngest Elite Four we've ever had, even younger than Acerola, and her partner is Tinkaton. I really like how they've basically included such a wide diversity of characters in the Elite Four this time, and Poppy being basically just a little kid really helps with that. Her personality is not much to speak of, but she's quite excitable when she, which lends to some funny interactions with the other 3 Elite Four members. I've already talked about Larry in the Gym Leader section, but the way that they reveal that Larry is back is honestly hilarious. It's here that we learn his boss is La Primera, Gita, and that he does all of this because she's asking him to. I also appreciate that he's using flying-type Pokemon here instead of normal types that he's accustomed to. It just makes a nice change and gives Paldea a trainer for every type. Finally, there's Hassel. I really like Hassel's character as he's a very different take on a Dragon-type trainer. We learn through his story in the Academy that he's supposed to return to his home region to become the head of a family who've all specialised in Dragon types. With your help, he gains the courage to say no to returning home, and instead chooses to remain as an art teacher and Elite Four member. I also really like his relationship with Brassius, as it gives his character a really caring nature. Also, without Hassel, we wouldn't have Professor Gibble, so 10 out of 10. Gita is a character who you kind of get a read of during your initial interactions with her, but she seems like a bit of a blank slate, especially compared to the Elite Four and, of course, Leon from Sword and Shield. Her personality traits don't really shine through much at all, but I do get the feeling that she takes her job very seriously while also knowing how to have a good laugh and all that. Unfortunately, she just doesn't really stick out in my mind in comparison to other champions, like Cynthia, Iris, Steven, and even Diantha. Though that might change with an appearance in the DLC or when she's inevitably added to Pokemon Masters. Spoiler alert, it didn't! The Academy has a number of trainers who you get to know throughout the game, especially through the lesson system. Clavel is the director of the Academy, and you get to know him through the Starfall Street storyline, as well as the openings and closing sections of the game. He's a well-developed character who wants the best for all of his students, even Team Star. He clearly knows that he doesn't want to take serious action against them, but instead comes to understand them and try to convince them to return to the Academy, which he eventually succeeds at. To me, that portrays him as someone who cares about the people that they're responsible for, not just caring about their own reputation, and I really like that about Clavel. Jacques is your homeroom teacher, and he teaches biology. He's the trainer who created the Pokédex app in Paldea, and tasks you with filling out the Pokédex for him. You see him a couple times outside of his lessons, such as in the Montenevera gym, after taking on Rhyme. He's presented as almost insecure in some ways, as he seems quite shy and adds a question on the end of his test to ask if his Pokédex is really good. I really like this take on the typical professor character, as he's not confident as the others, but still plays an important role in the study of Pokemon. Salvatore is a great character, mainly because of his design. I really do like how he takes care of a poor me throughout your entire time with him, and also gives you the gift of a Galarian Meowth. He's clearly themed around Alolan and Raichu, and in some ways he looks a lot like Raihan, leading to many to believe that the two are related. Regardless, he's a great character. I wish we got to know more throughout the game because what we did get was great. Time is a maths teacher, but she used to be a rock-type gym leader before quitting and giving up her role as a gym leader to her sister, Rhyme. In comparison to her sister, Time seems quite normal, in that she's pretty much a normal teacher. Outside of her specialising in rock types, there really isn't much to grasp when it comes to Time. But I like her as a character, and I'm glad that we did get that rock type trainer so we can truly say that Paldea is a specialist for every type. Dendra is the battle studies teacher at the Academy, and acts as a second fighting type specialist for the game. She uses Pokemon like Hariyama, Medicham, and Paldean Tauros, and she's a pretty cool trainer. Outside of her classes, you meet her in the Alphanada gym, as she runs the gym challenge there. It's a pretty simple minigame, but it can be a lot of fun at times. It reminds me of one of those minigames in Wii Party, to be honest, and I think having Dendra's character be there makes a lot of sense, as she's supposed to be a childhood friend of Tulip, the gym leader. It's a shame we never really get to see the two properly interact, and Dendra actually builds up more of a bond with Miriam throughout the game. But on the whole, Dendra's character is great. Speaking of Miriam, she acts as the school nurse, and as you get to know her, you learn that she actually wants to be a teacher, but unfortunately failed the exam twice. Through your interactions with her, you eventually build up a confidence enough to go and take the test one more time, which ends with her passing and achieving her dreams of becoming a teacher. It's a really lovely moment that just adds a lot to this game. It's really great. Saguaro is a home economics teacher and he loves to cook. Despite his gruff exterior, he adores cute things, which in some ways reminds me of my own struggles, though I don't particularly come off as gruff. In any case, as you learn more about Saguaro, you learn a lot more about the Herba Mystica, and you learn that he has a very sweet tooth as well. It's a touching moment and shows that the characters in this game are often more than meets the eye. It did remind me of the fact that Bee in Sword and Shield is also revealed to have a bit of a sweet tooth, and thought that that was a funny coincidence. Last but certainly not least is Ryfort. Ryfort is a history teacher, and is adorned with many accessories referencing legendary Pokemon, mostly from the Alola region. She has an Articuno necklace, a Tapu Fini bracelet, a Lunala belt, and a Marshadow hair clip. I really like that kind of characterizing, as it makes the game feel less like it takes place in a bubble outside of the wider Pokemon world, which is something many games, including Sword and Shield, suffer from. She helps the player unlock a new side story, which is about the treasures of Ruin. These 4 legendary Pokemon are all manifestations of evils, poured into inanimate objects and sealed away. The player will go on a quest to find the ominous stakes and drive them out of the ground, releasing the 4 ruinous Pokemon, but ultimately catching them. Ryfort's obsession with these Pokemon is interesting, as she is clearly interested in legendary Pokemon. I like how she's written, and the story that she gives you ends in you catching 4 new powerful Pokemon, who interestingly share a lot of similarities to the Island Guardians of Alola, except they all have the Dark type as opposed to the Fairy type. Of course, I should talk about Professor Sada and Churro. They don't seem to have much in the way of characters, but what they do have is great. I really love the whole idea that they disagree with what the real Sada and Churro wanted, and are trying to shut down the project, but can't do it without your help. I think it makes them seem far more deep as characters than the army of villains the series produced before. Giovanni, Archer, Guzma are all about stealing Pokemon, Ghetsis wants world domination, Cyrus literally wants to destroy the universe and build a new one, Lysander wants to commit genocide, and Archie and Maxie are just environmental extremists. Having Sada and Churro actually not want to be the villain, but being forced into it because the professor cannot change the AI's programming, because of being dead and all. The bit where the professor's going into the portal and the AI tells Alvin that the professor loved him makes me cry every time, including right now. Pokemon music has always been pretty damn good. It's kind of known for it. From iconic battle themes to incredible city and route themes, Pokemon's music has been listed as some of the best in the industry. So to say I find myself disappointed by Scarlet and Violet is a real shame. It's not all bad, there are some amazing themes which we'll go over first, but I do have a lot of gripes with this game's soundtrack. Starting with the good, a lot of the story themes are great. Nemona's theme, all of the team's star music, the Academy Ace tournament theme, and the Pokemon League themes are all amazing. Some real highlights are the Elite Four and Champion themes, which makes it a damn shame that not all of us will get to hear them in the game in full, huh? In any case, both the Elite Four and Gita's themes are genuinely some of the best in their category, with Gita's referencing loads of past Champion themes, including Lance and Red's theme. The Elite Four theme really reminds me of the Alola Elite Four theme, and it sounds really great to be honest. Gita's theme genuinely feels like a final champion battle, like you're really facing the top champion. That's how climactic and amazing it is. Every time I hear it, I feel so absorbed in the battle. I especially love the part with the acoustic guitar, it just sounds amazing. The atmosphere also works really, really well. Standing on top of a roof overlooking where your journey began in earnest, it's a fantastic setting for a battle. But if Gita's theme felt like the ultimate champion theme, then Nemona's final theme is the ultimate rival theme. It's so good. They took what they did for Hop and Marnie in Sword and Shield and turned it up to the max, as it really feels like a battle to have fun against your friend and strongest rival. Not just a battle to achieve champion rank, but one that has much more of a sentimental value. I'd also like to talk about how incredible the Treasure of Ruins theme is. It's incredibly intense while also being great fun. The instrumentation is perfect as it gives off a very unnatural vibe in comparison to the rest of the game's music. While not nearly as strange, it does remind me of the Tapu theme in a lot of ways. I wonder if there is a connection there, or if I'm just seeing and hearing things. I also especially love when that weird circus sounding bell or organ starts playing, it really evokes the feeling that these legendaries are playing with you. I don't know if that's actually what it was supposed to do, but that same instrument being used in the Mystery Carnival in Pokkén Tournament, and now that's all I think of when I hear it. Of course, I've got to mention the game's best themes. Area Zero and Showdown in the Zero Lab. The Area Zero motif is one of those motifs that will just get stuck in your head, and it is used so well in these songs. Having it be quite slow in the Area Zero theme works really well, because it's a slow descent into the depths. It almost makes it more tense because it's drawing it all out rather than speeding you into the final battle. Of course, you then have the final battle with Sada and Churro theme. It's a theme you will never forget after hearing it once. The intensity is ramped up to the maximum, and it feels so alien and unnatural, which fits the story just so well. Especially, in my opinion, in Violet, because the instrumentation is also synthesized and robotic. I feel it fits with the Violet endgame really nicely. The same goes for the Sada and Churro encounter theme. When you first hear it, you tend to think it's just because they have a bit of a personality, but when you actually meet them, you realise that the reason that theme sounds so robotic and jumpy is because that is what the Professor is. Well, as you know them at least. There are definitely some other good themes in there, such as the Cabo Poco theme, the Cascarafa theme, Levincia and Messagoza. But I'm sad to say that it goes downhill from here. Let's start with the overworld music. Never before have I felt so disappointed in overworld themes in a Pokemon game. Only the towns I mentioned before actually get unique music, and anything else gets variation on the theme of that province. There are 4 provinces, and each area has a different variation on that theme when riding your Koraidon or Miraidon. Now this already wouldn't be fine, but it gets worse. Not only is the wild battle music replaced with another variation on these themes, but none of these themes are actually that good to begin with. It really is a shame, because Sword and Shield's overworld themes were great. Each city had its own theme, and while the route themes were a bit of a letdown, they didn't do this at least. I don't really have much else to say on those themes in particular. I just find myself disappointed in them. As for Arven's theme, it's a real shame, because his themes do not fit him at all, especially his encounter theme, which after you get to know him feels completely contrary to what the theme should be. The standard trainer battle theme is alright, but I would much prefer it to have a bit more going for it. The gym leader theme, however, is a major disappointment. I definitely see what they were going for, a bit like Sword and Shield, where it doesn't have much substance until the gimmick comes into play. But Sword and Shield worked because it was intense. This song just has absolutely nothing to it, and it just makes gym battles really quite boring. It has loads of potential though, because the intro is great, but the rest of the theme is just such a letdown. On a similar note, Clavel's theme is really dull and makes the whole battle affair seem stuck in the past, which doesn't exactly fit with Clavel's character, as he's quite new to the school, only being there for a year and a half. It's not a good theme really. I really want to call attention to the final battle theme with the Paradise Protection Protocol. Look, from someone who has a massive attachment to Alola, I love that they effectively used the Z-Move Obtain theme in this game, but here, now, it doesn't help that the actual battle theme is made in the same way as the Kahuna battle theme, with even the instrumentation being incredibly similar. Look, I love the Kahuna theme, and I love that this theme in concept, but as the final battle for the safety of all Paldea, it just doesn't fit. It completely contrasts with the intensity set up by the AI Professor theme, and I think that they could have just done something a bit more dark and intense to end off this game. Hey, to be honest, you should have used this as the basis of the gym leader theme, because this is what a gym battle is. And honestly, the Kahuna theme was so good that I honestly wouldn't mind if they just slapped the theme on again. But you know, that's my gripes on the music design itself, but I do have another complaint about the placement of a certain track. While I do like the title screen theme, the fact it only plays after the end of the story feels a bit odd to me. Like, what difference does it make? The title screen doesn't have some hidden post-game secret in it, so I don't know why they didn't just use it there from the beginning. I don't have much else to say regarding the sound design, but that's okay. I'll inevitably make up for it with the art design section. Get ready for a long one. Yeah, we're on page 26 of 40 in this script, and this section goes all the way to about page like 37, I think. Anyway, I'm not going to be looking at the game from a technical aspect much in this section, but rather from a design standpoint. I'm actually really looking forward to delving into the conceptual designs seen in these titles, as I'm hoping it'll help me improve my own art and designs. Alright, let's begin. It's quite hard to find a good starting point, as originally I was going to split it into character design and Pokemon design, landscape design and world design, which is basically the way the world actually looks and how it's portrayed artistically through textures, the design of areas, stylistic choices, etc. But all of them tie into one another a lot, so I don't think it would make sense to split them all up. Instead, I'm going to go through the different sections of this game and talk about that instead. I'm going to start by talking about the very early game, including the design of Cabo Poco, Poco Path, Los Platos, as well as the player's house, Nemona's house, and Inlet Grotto. From a landscaping perspective, it's relatively simple and linear, but it's definitely more open than the opening section of previous regions, but it still funnels the player towards where they need to be so that they can meet with Koraidon and Miraidon, get all of the information from Nemona and Arven, and reach Mesagoza without much of any trouble. While the rest of the game has lots of elevation, thanks to Koraidon and Miraidon's ability to jump up elevations, this part of the game is relatively lacking in that part, with the only elevation being when the player falls down to the beach and the exit and the exit of Inlet Grotto. Of course, when you return later in the game, more is explorable and there is extra elevation. From an artistic standpoint, it's one of the best parts of the game. It feels lush and full of life, which has especially helped with the overworld Pokemon being far more interactive than in Sword and Shield. I really like how Pokemon like Tarantula and Applin live in the trees and can fall off when your Miraidon or Koraidon runs into those trees. I also like how the lock-on feature returns from Legends Arceus. While it is less intuitive, it still allows the player to lock onto wild Pokemon that may be out of their reach otherwise and throw a Pokeball to initiate a battle. Something I do heavily appreciate about this game is that the button used to throw Pokeballs is consistent with Legends Arceus, allowing an easy switch from game to game. The same goes for summoning your Miraidon or Koraidon, except there are some inconsistencies. This seems like a good time to take a detour from the part of the game and talk about the design of the control layout, which ties into the UI design quite nicely. As with every other 3D controlling game, the player's movement is controlled by the left stick and the right stick controls the camera. This is great, but my only complaint is that when Koraidon and Miraidon are at top speed, the camera is actually not fast enough to keep up with the player, causing a disconnect which forces the player to wait until the camera catches up, which just slows down the game in general. As with previous titles in the series, you can open the menu with the X button, which now shows an overlay above gameplay rather than being a separate screen. This seems like a good idea on paper, but the trade-off is that because of this game does not actually pause, so while you're in your boxes, your shiny could appear and despawn, which is an unfortunate oversight. Another change to this menu is now, instead of having a Pokemon option, your party will be displayed on the left of your screen, and other options will be displayed on the right. The B button cancels an action, but during normal gameplay can make the character crouch. The A button is your usual action button. The Y button opens the map, which for the most part I like. As I mentioned before, ZR and Plus remain consistent with Pokemon Legends Arceus in that they throw a Pokeball and summon your ride Pokemon respectively. The minus button opens the Pokédex, which is nice. It's good to have an easy shortcut to that. Holding ZL gives you focus, allowing you to see the level and name of any Pokemon, as well as track it to more easily engage it in battle. However, this system is far less intuitive than its counterparts in Pokemon Legends Arceus, simply because it doesn't have the crosshair, so it's harder to target a Pokemon. It should also be noted that what is the game's most prevalent bug, in my opinion, is all caused by the lock-on feature. Effectively, you can use the camera and when you're not near a door that doesn't open, you can see right into someone's house. You can see right through caves, houses, shops, anything like that. It's quite jarring, and I'm hoping that for the next games they'll have fixed it. Who knows, maybe they won't even have Pokemon spawn in the cave walls. Yeah, it's actually become necessary to use this glitch as a shiny hunter, because you could just miss a shiny of it because it was in the cave's walls. Genuinely, I do not understand how this wasn't found before released, or patched out in the 2 years since. Anyway, I think I've strayed a bit too far from control, so getting back on track. I already talked about some of the more specific control design options in the gameplay section, but to quickly pivot on something I said earlier, in concept, I like the fact that all of your ride Pokemon are a single function rather than lots that you have to switch between, such as in Legends Arceus and the Alola games. While I definitely think the way you unlock new powers shouldn't have been tied to anything linear, and that the over-reliance on Koraidon and Miraidon is definitely jarring and honestly wrecks my enjoyment of the games in some places, I think that in concept, they were definitely doing the right thing in simplifying the ride mechanics. I think that kind of sums up my points when it comes to control design, so let's get back to the early game's design. We briefly talked about Poké Path, but I really wanted to highlight Inlet Grotto. It's probably this game's most artistically pleasing cave, and it looks amazing, with some bioluminescent material growing on the walls and lighting up your path. Not to mention the different elevations and little passages you can get to. Unfortunately, it's ruined in some ways because most players will only experience it at the beginning of the story, where it is an incredibly slow trek up to the opening where Nemona is waiting for you. Slowed down because you have to go at Koraidon or Miraidon's pace, which was for some reason super slow. Now, I would understand if it was their intention to get you to take in the beautiful cave, but doing it so heavy-handed like this was not the solution. It makes it feel really slow and serves as more of an annoyance for most players now. While we're on the topic, there's another point in the game that does this as well, but it's somehow worse. At the very beginning of the game, just after you meet Clavel, and you're about to leave for Nemona's house, you find yourself surrounded by 3 starter Pokemon. Except something's wrong. Oh yeah, you're walking at a snail's pace for some reason. On my first playthrough, this was genuinely one of my first annoyances, but not my first, sadly, as I loved exploring, and once I reached the back of the player's house, I groaned, realising that I'd have to go at this horrible pace all the way to Nemona's. But then for some reason they just trigger the running just outside the player's house, which makes me wonder why it wasn't triggered from the start. It's not like you get running shoes from your mum in this game, or have to be told to hold the B button to run or anything. It's completely arbitrary. It makes me wonder what the intention was here. Working slightly backwards, Cabo Poco, the first town in the game, if you can even call it a town when it's basically just a street with a house at either end, is as bland as Postwick was in Sword and Shield, and doesn't even have the Slumbering Weald going for it. It serves only to be where you and Nemona live, which you could argue many previous Pokemon games have done this, and you'd be correct. But the difference here is that they were not 3D home console games that were on the same platform as, oh I don't know, The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom and Legends Arceus. Jubilife Village works so well because it was a town that evolved with the player as you journeyed through the game, which was such a cool mechanic as it meant that you got to know the NPCs that inhabited the town on more than a basic level. Whereas in Scarlet and Violet, you have 2 random people in Cabo Poco who just don't have a house. They just stand there. Luckily for us, we don't have to stay here long. After we trek through Poké Path, we arrive at the first lighthouse, which is well situated, as it gives us a really nice view of the game's main city, Messagoza. But first we arrive at Los Platos, which is the equivalent of Wedgehurst, Oldale Town, Aquacord Town, etc., in that it has no plot significance, but acts as a way to introduce players to core concepts such as Pokemon Centers and potions. The walk to Los Platos is actually really nice and gives you a couple of offshoot areas which you can explore to catch different Pokemon such as Wiglet, which is a great way of rewarding the player exploring. Would be nice if they did this in the whole game, really, wouldn't it? You also get a nice pond just off the side of the town, which is home to Paldean Wooper and Fido, 2 Pokemon that have been previously revealed through trailers. And it gives you the chance to add some early game type diversity to your team, as it's not often the case that Poison, Dark and Fairy types are found so early into one's journey, and the whole vista is already quite memorable as a location. The same, however, cannot be said for the town that you enter afterwards. I have a pretty good memory, and that goes double for anything concerning Pokemon, Doctor Who or The Legend of Zelda, so it's very unusual that I'll forget a town's name as often as I forget Los Platos. And it's not just the name either. It serves no purpose besides Nemona showing you how to use a Pokemon Center. Now I won't lie to you, outside of their main story functions, it's quite rare that a Pokemon Town will serve any purpose, which is a shame in my opinion, but they are usually a lot more memorable than this. I know I'm specifically talking about Los Platos, but to be honest with you, outside of Messagoza, I don't really think the same can be said for every town and city in Paldea. Take Verbank City for example. Functionally, it serves as where the Poison type gym is held, and so you have to go there to battle Roxy. But from an aesthetical point of view, it stands out in the mind because everything is designed to look like a town that would house a punk rock Poison type gym. Or take Circhester in Galar, Again, functionally, it's exactly the same, as it only really serves to be where you battle Melanie or Gordy and learn a little bit more about the plot. But aesthetically, everything is designed to tell a story. It's very obviously reminiscent of Bath, here in the UK, and of course that includes the famous Roman baths. In Circhester, those baths are supposedly where the heroes rested after battle. Similarly to the Roman baths in Bath, is where the Romans rested after their battles. While you do visit this location in the story, it doesn't affect the player's story or the game in any way. It's just a cool place for you to battle hop. Or it would be if they actually made a battle background for it. Unfortunately, none of the towns in Paldea have little details like that, or at least not on the same level. Levincia does house a big company in Paldea Realty, which we start to learn a bit more about in the DLC, but it serves no purpose. It doesn't really stand out. We don't even know what they do, really. We just know that their CEO is very rich and has a weirdly rich, obsessed boyfriend partner thingy? Bodyguard? Anyway, it's not helped by the fact that the only buildings you can go into in this game are plot-significant ones, such as the Academy, your house, and Nemona's house, and the gyms. You can't go into any other house or shop in the games. It's all done through menus. It really does take away a lot of the feel from previous games. I'm sure it's because Game Freak wants to streamline the item buying process instead of you having to walk into a building and talk to a cashier, menu just pops up straight away. But it genuinely just makes the game feel that bit more soulless and even more rushed. Los Platos specifically is very disappointing as a town, as there's nothing to do there whatsoever, other than talk to a couple of NPCs who give you a few brief pointers before you go on your journey to Mesagoza. After leaving Los Platos, you walk up a hill that you get to the gate of Mesagoza. On this hill, you can battle a number of trainers and add some cool new Pokemon to your team, like Shroodle, and it is designed quite nicely. But I just wish there was just a bit more to it than a short walk to Mesagoza. This area does have one unintentional function, however, that being if you initiate a wild battle with a Pokemon on the other side of a certain hill, your player will be teleported to that hill, allowing you to explore practically the whole world before even going to Mesagoza, having access to Terrastyle, Koraidon, or Miraidon. Getting back to where we should be though, Mesagoza. It's a genuinely wonderfully designed city, from the gates to the academy, with lots of elevation, alleyways, and different shops and vistas to explore. Except there is one tiny problem. There is practically nothing to do outside of the academy. The academy has lessons in it for you to participate in, but they provide little to no purpose. Though I will admit that from a story and world building standpoint, they do help you to get to know the teachers, and are just a bit of fun, really, aren't they? And if you're new to the series, the lessons can actually really help you get to grips with things. The problem with Mesagoza becomes clear the moment you step outside of the academy and realise that there is little else to do besides go shopping, and in the post-game, the Academy Ace tournament. But even then, you have to go into the academy to initiate it. Personally, I think Mesagoza would have really benefited from being a bit more like Jubilife Village in Legends Arceus. Not necessarily in that it's being built as you progress through the story, but if you had some NPCs who give you side quests to go on both within the city and outside of it, which gave you more incentive to explore, it would have been amazing. Honestly, I think a set of looker missions similar to the ones in Lumio City would have been fab in this city, as while it's not as big as its Carlosian counterpart, it has enough nooks and crannies to hide a bunch of mysteries for us to solve. From Mesagoza, the world really opens up to you. So we'll be going province by province, starting with the West Province. As you leave Mesagoza, you find a simply wonderfully designed olive orchard setup. There's a lot of trainers and Pokemon here, and it's really well designed. But my biggest gripe with it is that there is effectively a single path which takes you straight to Cortondo. I understand that Pokemon's primary audience is kids, but you already marked out on our maps where we need to go, so having it be a single path with no obstacles, now that trainer battles are done by talking to people rather than just crossing paths. Aside from that though, the path to Cortondo is pretty great, to be honest. If you feel so inclined, there are lots of places to explore, which is nice. It's just a shame that the old towers don't really have any significance outside of being a good vantage point, and obviously being where you can catch Gimmighoul. While visually they all look great, the fact that they don't serve a purpose is a bit disappointing. I could see a story of how a legendary Pokemon would come and torment the people of Paldea, and the watchtowers would serve as lookouts to spot if it was returning. And then as the player, you would want to see if you could find this legendary Pokemon by finding the right tower. It would be a good way to bring back roaming legendaries mechanic from older titles. While I've praised the areas surrounding Cortondo, the town itself doesn't get the same praise from me, I'm afraid. While there is a lot that I like about it, such as the tiling on the road or the path up to the battle arena, the layout of this town is downright dull. It's such a tiny area which feels like it's been made using a tile set, which I know it has to an extent, but I never felt that with places like Circhester, Turfield, or even Paniolo Town and Heya Heya City. It's just a downgrade that I feel was just quite unnecessary. It's such a small town as well, there's literally nothing else to do here than battle Katie and move on. To be fair, the same is true for most of the towns in this game, and we'll definitely get to that in good time. After leaving Cortondo, the environment stays relatively similar for a while, until you get somewhere much hillier. I quite like this area of the game. I really like the wind turbines, and there are quite a few NPCs in that area, which gives it a sense of life which most other parts of this world just doesn't have. There's a big hill where you can fight the Titan Bombardier, which is really cool as it's also near where Xian Pao is, later on in the game. Before we leave this area, I'd like to talk about Alfanada Cavern and the town where it gets its name from, Alfanada. Alfanada is a town based on the art of pottery, which is a really cool concept for a Pokemon town, and the aesthetic design of the town definitely helps show this theme clearly. However, it's a shame that the gym leader is not related to the pottery aspect of the town whatsoever. As much as I like Tulip as a character, having her be a beautician rather than a pottery master is a real waste of potential, as one of the key aspects of a Pokemon's town is to have at least one main character you meet there fit into that town. Alfanada Cavern, which is how you reach the Psychic Gym Town, is normally only accessible with climb, which is definitely one way of going about it, but as I often do, I found that if you go down to the beach below, there is actually another path which takes you up there earlier, which is really cool as it's one of those rewards for exploring that I keep mentioning. The cavern is just a good Pokemon cave, nothing more or nothing less, but it's a shame you're not really forced to see more of it during the story. Cascarafa, the water-based gym town, is a little better than the bug-themed one that we saw earlier, as it at least has a bit of world building in Kofu's kitchen. Not that you see Kofu in there, or couldn't actually go in there, it's still a glorified menu, but hey, it's better than having Katie shot around by a random NPC rather than her actually being there after you battle her. The town's design is actually very aesthetically nice, and is quite visually unique for the game. It's also helped by being based on waterfalls and uses the same elevator system that we saw in Gala's Motorstoke, but this time with 3 levels rather than the 2 back there. Of course there is a small problem, being that the elevators take forever to actually get you up and down, and their hitboxes to activate them is far too large. It would have been better if we'd just been able to operate them using a button like in Motorstoke. My only other main grievance with the town is where it's situated. Genuinely, whose idea was it to have the water gym take place next to a desert where a sandstorm can just begin at any point? I'm not going to lie to you, not the best move I can think of, as it looks quite strange visually and thematically, to be honest. Personally, I'd have had it be that Porto Marinada and Cascarafa were close together, possibly situating Cascarafa just the other side of Asado Desert, or possibly even further away, just not to the point where you cross a bridge from Watertown and enter big open desert. Speaking of Porto Marinada, this is one of those parts of the game where you have a market, in which you can bid on different items each day. You're introduced to this town during Kofu's gym challenge, where he needs some seaweed, and you have to deliver him his wallet, which I recently discovered is now a real wallet you can buy, and yes please, I would like that very much. Visually, this town is quite strange, but not necessarily in a bad way. In fact, I quite like it. The houses are all designed like beach huts almost, with strange patterns that aren't typical of what you'd expect for people's permanent homes. But you know, that's what makes it so great, in the way that feels so Pokemon, in a way that I just simply can't describe but makes total sense if you know what I'm talking about. I also love the mosaic style drawings of certain water Pokemon like Shelder and Clauncher. It really feels like it fits in well with the rest of the town's aesthetic. The warehouse may seem a little out of place, but it actually makes total sense to be here, as where else would you put everything that comes from the sea? It serves a purpose just like everything else. Again, I lament that there is very little to do here, but I think that you get by now that I'm going to say that about pretty much everywhere in the game unless I say otherwise. Though I will say that in the DLC, having Atticus's auctions there was a fantastic choice. Good job, guys. Though I will again say, you should not have to pay 30 quid to get more enjoyment out of the game. But oh well. Continuing on our journey, we find ourselves at Casaroya Lake, an idyllic, peaceful location where you fight the Titan Dondozo and Tatsugiri, and can have a peaceful time surfing the waves. Castle Royal Lake is designed pretty well and feels like a modern day interpretation of what the Sinnoh Lakes would look like had they been designed for an open world setting. It also leads us to Sokarat Path, a beautiful autumnal area in the game, which I feel should have been a lot more forested, but otherwise I really love. It's a shame it's so small and that the trees are so far apart, but then again I doubt the game's frame rate would have coped very well with what I'm picturing in mind. I love autumnal areas in Pokemon games, especially at Critique City, so this was a lovely addition to that game, and I really like that you can find Ting-Lu hidden away around here as well. Medali is the next location on our journey across Paldea, and it's actually really good aesthetically, but the concept just isn't there really. I love additions like the town auditorium and the neon sign, but it doesn't really have an identity. There's lots of warehouses and cafes, but beside that it just feels somewhat jumbled and almost too ordinary. Which I guess is sort of the point, given that this is where everyone's favourite character, Larry, is based. But I think giving it a feel of somewhere that either had a lot of entertainment going on in the auditorium, or possibly giving it a game street, not that we'd be able to play said games, but the vibes from the neon sign gave me gambling vibes. Not quite sure why, but it would have been cool to see some thematic consistency in this town. But overall, I really do quite like it aesthetically, except for one bit that seems so completely different from the rest of it. That being the Treasure Eatery, which is of course based on a stylized on a Japanese restaurant, which would have been a really cool aesthetic for the whole town to adopt, but alas it did not, and the rest remained pretty bland. Moving further on, we get to Glaciado Mountain, a towering snowy mountaintop which the player has to scale. It's actually really well designed, and there is no single path to get to Montenevera or Grusha's gym, and you have to explore yourself. It's a lot of fun and was one of my favourite parts of the game's exploration. Speaking of Montenevera, this is my favourite town in the whole game. Its aesthetic is a mix of the usual ice town like Snowpoint City or Snowbell City, fused with the eeriness of ghost-type vibes. There are lots of candles around the town, most of them having a grey colour to them, while some having gold, which is very visually similar to Greavard and Shiny Greavard. All the lamps in the town are also stylized to look like Lampent, which is somewhat ironic because Lampent wasn't in base Scarlet and Violet, though I do find it nice that I can now send my Lampent out by the Lampent lamps. You also have Rhyme's stage, which looks very cool, and I love how the lights turn on as you continue to battle through the gym's challenge. My only issue with the area is how small it is, as a bit like Ballonlea and Gala, it feels like it could be much bigger than this, with more to do. Moving on to the northeastern side of Paldea, we now find ourselves in a very cool looking bamboo grove, where Team Star's fighting base is. I love this area of the game, the aesthetics are so pretty, it's a shame that the frame rate here is horrendous. You know what I was saying about the trees in the foresty areas earlier? This is probably why they didn't put more there, because this place has quite a few trees, and the frame rate, my god, the frame rate. It's also a shame that the aesthetic doesn't continue very far into the area, as it would have been better if it had expanded further beyond, at least engulfing all of North Province Area 2, rather than just a subsection of it. The bamboo grove itself is really nice, and the ponds and little details help add to the whole aesthetic. I'd have liked it if Fury Falls had been a bit more prominent, especially since it's where you fight Chi-Yu in the postgame. But on the whole, it's a really nicely designed area and well-balanced part of the world. Going to the foot of Glaciado Mountain, Zappa Pico is a very well-designed part of the game. Having the houses built into the side of cliff walls was such a cool concept, and I would have loved to explore inside them. It's just a nice location in general, and the vibes I get there are great. It also seamlessly integrates into the area around it, with the dry wasteland surrounding it in all directions, except for the north onto Glaciado Mountain. It turns out you were actually originally going to be able to explore inside the houses. We actually found some sort of file for the interior of the houses. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it just makes me a bit more disappointed that we couldn't go inside. While we're in this part of the world, the Tag Tree Thicket is the closest this game gets to a forest, and I think that's a bit of a shame. Compared to previous areas like Eterna Forest, Santaloon Forest and the Heartwood, it's a little bit bland and empty, it's just a lot of wasted potential. I do, however, like the way that some of the trees have been painted on by Grafii, as it just adds to the world building of the game tremendously. Though it would have been nice to see Grafii drawing on them in the wild, but I understand why they couldn't do that, as it would have been far more taxing resource-wise. Speaking of this, it would also be nice if they didn't also look like pixelated messes, but oh well. Going down south to Lavincia, we find ourselves in the most modern city in Paldea. As I mentioned earlier on, there are tall skyscrapers that belong to Paldea Realty, but we don't know anything about them. There are lots of shops, and because of that, when you're looking for a certain one, you can easily get lost in streets that do nothing for you, and overall it's one of the game's biggest cities. I really do like it in a lot of ways, especially the Battle Court being the city's centrepiece suspended over water, but I do find I wish it was a bit more fantastical. At the minute, the buildings aside from Paldea Realty are all shaped like real buildings, and that just give the city a very mundane feel. Having the city be future focused where it would have been a great choice, but they didn't go far enough with it. If they had done it to the point where the buildings all had these weird and wacky designs, it would have felt really unique as a Pokemon city. It's not as though Pokemon couldn't do futuristic cities, just look at Sunyshore City. It's a perfect example. Not to mention how futuristic Blueberry Academy is. It's perfect for this kind of thing. I'm hoping for a bit more visual uniqueness if we ever return to Levincia post Scarlet and Violet. Our penultimate stop is of course the lovely town of Artisan. I love this town because it's so nicely designed. I love how it focuses on the windmill in the centre with lots of art pieces dotted about, really providing a good introduction to what the gym will be about. This is exactly what I was talking about when I was talking about Verbank City being more than just where you fight Roxy. The aesthetic helps to build a vibe of the area that builds an impression. The maze, the little paths around the town, and the playground are all really great additions that are just a bit of fun and add to the adventure you're going on. Finally, we go further south to where we fought the Titan Clorth, a craggy area with lots of hills. I quite like this area from an aesthetic point of view. It doesn't have one clear path and has lots of hidden paths to explore. It's a great addition to the world, and it really got me excited to explore Paldea when I first got to play Pokemon Scarlet and Violet just 2 years ago. Of course, there is just one more interesting thing about this area. It's the only part of the game where there is somewhere you can't get to without the use of Koraidon and Miraidon's final ability, beside from them being able to battle, the climbing ability. There's a giant cliff, which of course I've talked about before and I will be talking about later on, but unfortunately there's very little to do up there. I think it would have been great to hide like a legendary Pokemon up there, but I'll go more into that in a later section. Now you might think we're at the end of this section, but there's actually one more thing worth talking about. Area Zero. The game climaxes at the fantastically designed Area Zero, which is tucked away inside the Great Crater of Paldea. This area has 2 distinct sections to it, well technically 3, but we'll be coming back to that. When you first arrive, you're in this incredibly beautiful grassland, which you descend to get towards the Zero Lab. The actual grassland, however, is depicted as a pristine garden, which is seemingly being taken over by the Terra Crystals and the Paradox Pokemon. I adore this, and coupled with the music, it's really quite eerie when you're first travelling down there for the first time with Nemona, Arven and Penny. And then you get to the big cavern, and this place is stunning. Waterfalls from the surface flood into this area, flooding the floor with water. But before you get there, you have to descend the winding paths of the cavern, with lots of Terra Crystals glowing and Glamora attached to the walls. It's an incredible visual, which only gets more impressive as you reach the Zero Lab, as inside you'll find a destroyed futuristic lab, which is where the true climax of the game takes place. It's very claustrophobic at first, but when you get down to the time machine, you're in this fantastical area surrounded by these gleaming crystals and fighting for your life in a place that has taken clear inspiration from the TARDIS of Doctor Who fame. It's just amazing and I love it completely. Truly, it took my breath away from the first time I was here. And if I'm being honest, just a quick aside, I really like how it goes from being something that seems quite claustrophobic to something that seems very open. That to me is again very reminiscent of Doctor Who. Of course, the TARDIS being a massive space squeezed into that tiny police box exterior. Of course, that might not have been intentional, but I think it really works. This brings us to the end of our Paldea tour, but that doesn't mean I'm done talking just yet. I want to talk about the UI of the games. It's bad. It's bad. Mainly because it looks really, really basic and not at all stylized enough. Look at Sword and Shield's UI. It doesn't look fantastic by any means, but it has a lot more style to it than Scarlet and Violet's. Or take Legends Arceus, which is genuinely peak Pokemon UI design, because it fits thematically without looking jarring and stands out by looking like it was done at the last minute. The boxes and bag look fine, but can be optimized better. But my main problem was with battle UI, text boxes and such. Now I'll talk about the character design. To be honest, they're mostly really good. I love character design in most Pokemon games, to be fair, but here I really like them. The only thing I don't like is that a lot of the characters are stuck with the uniform style for this approach, such as the player, Nemona, and Arven. Otherwise, I think that the character designs have hit their piece here. All of the gym leaders in Elite Four feel styled to fit their personalities, the teachers all have interestingly unique designs, despite how little time we spend with them, and all 3 rivals look pretty damn cool this time. The Team Star Boss's designs are done fantastically, and I'm just really happy that the entire cast got great designs all around this time. I was very tempted to do a section where I just review every single Pokemon from these games, but this video is definitely long enough without it. Safe to say, I like a lot of the designs in this generation. Tinkaton, Clodsire, Ceruledge, Dashbun, Sprigatito line, Satitan, Miraidon, and many more besides. They're all really amazing and I love them all a lot. Okay, we've got one more section to go before I close off this video. Hope you're enjoying so far. Now let's talk about how not to make an open world. Okay, I do promise that this video will eventually end one day, but I wanted to talk about something that makes this game stand out from all previous Pokemon games. That being its nature as an open world adventure rather than the linear structure we're used to. I'd like to make it very clear that I think Pokemon's structure is perfect for an open world game, as giving you access to the entire world from pretty much the word go creates endless possibilities, and allows for you to properly create your game's team much more easily. I've always felt disappointed in Pokemon games when I've wanted to put Pokemon on my team, but found out that it wasn't available until close to the endgame, such as Vikavolt in Sun and Moon, or Alolan Ninetales in Legends Arceus. For this reason, having an open world seems perfect for a Pokemon game, as you can go anywhere and catch anything. I'm sure that the team at Game Freak probably were thinking on this basis as well, but they made a small, tiny error that kind of messed it all up. They forgot to scale trainers and wild Pokemon's levels to your teams or where you are in the story. Now, on the surface, this probably doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but of course it does have quite a big effect on the game as a whole. Mainly, it means that you can't really do what I was talking about a moment ago and use any Pokemon on your team, because a lot of the ones found on Glaceado Mountain or Casseroya Lake are horrendously overleveled for the majority of the game. It also has the impact of making the open world feel more like an illusion than an actual open world. After finishing the tutorial, you can walk all the way to Cascarafa and take on Kofu, but you just won't be ready for it, as his team will still be in the late 20s and yours will likely be in the early teens at this point in the game. Now this doesn't mean that you can't beat Kofu, and of course you probably could, but then you'd find Katie and Brassius later on in the game and you'd destroy their teams with a single glance. You're also not given any indication as to average levels for certain areas or a recommended order in which to take on the gym leaders, titans and team star bosses. Even though the Pokemon Center lady will sometimes help you out with telling you where to go, it's not necessarily in the right kind of order. It really makes it feel a bit like the choice to make it open world was made quite late into development. And while I'm pretty certain that isn't the case, basic research could have shown that this wasn't the best idea, especially when they decide to make the actual order, based on levels, look like this. Take Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom for a minute, and look at how they do scaling. As you complete more shrines, the enemies become stronger, going from red to blue to black to silver, but overworld weapons also scale up, with it being more common to find Dragonbone items and Royal Broadswords later into the game. The level scaling issue could have been fixed a number of ways. Have wild Pokemon and trainers' levels increase based on how many story events you do? For example, if you beat the first gym leader, everything's average level goes up by 2. Then, when you take on the first Titan, it goes up by 2 again. Then, if you take on a Team Star Boss, it goes up by another 2. If you want certain areas to remain weaker areas throughout the game, have Pokepath in that area be locked to that early level. I just feel that this would really have heightened the game experience for me, and made me feel a lot better about the open world. There are 2 other failings of this open world, and they're more about the world design itself. For starters, the region of Paldea is quite small as Pokemon regions go, or at least it feels like that. Now this could be a matter of perspective, as in most Pokemon regions you explore what seems to be just a part of a larger whole that is inaccessible to the player. But because Paldea is open world and with all of the different ride options you have, you can go pretty much anywhere without limits. Now given it's Game Freak's first time with an open world game, I'm not going to complain too much about this. But I will say that when I feel like I'm retracing my steps after less than a month of playing the game, it can get quite boring quite quickly. I hate to keep making the comparison, but Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom for the most part share a map. In Breath of the Wild, I've sunk nearly 400 hours into exploring that world and seeing every nook and cranny that Hyrule has to offer, and I really enjoyed it, even if there weren't particularly many rewards from doing that. In Tears of the Kingdom, I spent nearly an equal amount of time doing that in Breath of the Wild, just rediscovering the world I already knew from the previous game. That map of Hyrule is so captivating to me that I could just go exploring in it forever and always find something new that I hadn't seen before. Of course, there are handy incentives such as the shrines and Korok seeds, but ultimately, I just enjoy exploring that world. I didn't feel the same way with Paldea for a number of reasons. Firstly, I think the general size of the map is too small and too unvaried. It probably doesn't help that approximately a third of Paldea's explorable map is taken up by the Great Crater, but I definitely feel that there was room to grow, especially as, from Grusha's Battle Court, you can see beyond Levincia on one side, and beyond Medali on the other, which is a massive chunk on the map. I also think that making exploration fun would have been a really good idea. I'm sure they tried to make exploration as fun as possible, but it really missed the mark. Koraidon and Miraidon are horrendous to control, as I've complained about earlier, especially when climbing, and often when running as well. It often gets to the point where they get so far away from the camera that it just can't catch up in time. I think the idea of having Pokemon be what helps the player get around is perfect, but I feel that it doesn't work to have the Pokemon be so big and bulky that they take up so much of the screen, and they're really unintuitive to control, but still making scaling a mountain feel like no effort. Contrast this with Breath of the Wild, where Link is responsible for all of the player's actions. Climbing a mountain in that game feels like a real achievement because of the speed that Link moves paired with the upgrades to the stamina that you get throughout the game. This is something that could easily have been implemented in Scarlet and Violet. Very simply, instead of having you unlock abilities as you beat Titans, you can do everything but it's very weak at the start of the game. But as you defeat the Titans, you upgrade Koraidon and Miraidon's abilities so that they can climb for longer, so they can glide further, so they can swim for longer. Finally, I want to talk about world density. There's a very good balance that you have to strike in order to make a successful world design between size and density. For example, a game like Starfield has size in abundance, but there's very little to do in that universe, leading to a lot of players feeling very bored. Contrast this with Okami, which has a comparatively tiny world, though it's still not particularly small, but feels so alive because there's so much to do throughout it, with side quests, interesting places to explore, and minigames to play. Finding a balance between the two is very important as it allows the game to feel interesting and incentivizes exploration. Breath of the Wild strikes a fantastic balance here, though I would argue in some ways Tears of the Kingdom does it even better. In those games, as you explore the world, you can find shrines, mini-tests that the player can go on to test their courage, wisdom, and power, as well as the Korok seeds, which allow the player to grow their inventory. Not to mention the different side quests and general intrigue that comes from seeing the world unfold. Scarlet and Violet's world is comparatively barren. There's very little in the way of side quests, even less in the way of rewards for exploration or interesting parts of the map that generate intrigue within players. They did try to do something like this with the Gimmigholes. However, this really doesn't work in the way they wanted it to, because they just respawn after you get them, so I feel less motivated to talk to one every time I hear its cry. Not to mention that the Koroks, which the Gimmigholes are clearly meant to emulate, have a small challenge you need to do to unlock them, which is part of the fun. The landscape is also just quite boring and leaves little to the imagination. Breath of the Wild perfectly sculpts a landscape where you feel like you're discovering things at every turn by obscuring parts of the landscape using hills and mountains. There's a great GDC talk on that, by the way. Scarlet and Violet manages to fail at this, instead feeling quite basic of an environment, especially since you get the entire map unlocked from the beginning of the game. There's also very little in the way of discovery in the game. You never feel compelled to go somewhere that seems interesting, and even when there is something that seems slightly unusual, it ends up feeling quite disappointing. Take the big mountain in South Province Area 5. It's inaccessible for most of the game until you unlock the climb feature. It was actually a great subversion of the usual non-compelling landmarks, as I did think about the area a lot throughout my time with the game, wondering what they could be hiding up there. It kind of reminded me of how in the Dreamyard in Black and White 2, you can find a Latios or Latias just chilling there as a reward for re-exploring that area. I wondered if we'd find a cool legendary Pokemon up there. So you can imagine my disappointment when it turns out to be all the same Pokemon that you can find in that area anyway. Now, to be fair, this has been somewhat rectified, as now a legendary Pokemon is there after you beat the Indigo Disc, as Zekrom can be found up there. But it's too little too late, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm really not supposed to be talking about the DLC in this video anyway. There's a lot for Game Freak to learn when it comes to open worlds, and I really hope they talk to the Xenoblade and Zelda teams in future, as they have experience in making these worlds engaging and interesting. Either way, I think I've exhausted this topic a bit now. And with that, we come to the end of this very long video. So, I guess more than 22,000 words later, that's all from me. I've loved making this video, and I hope I didn't just come off as hating on the games or anything, because truly I really like them. I just think that there's a number of problems that I want to address before Z2A releases. From a personal interest perspective, this has been one of my best projects I've ever worked on, as it's given me a great angle of where to begin when it comes to my own games. It's really helped with my studies, and I hope that if any of you are also game design students, or even active developers, I hope that this has helped you in some way. Alright, I won't keep you any longer. I've got more videos like this in the works, so stay tuned. Thanks very much. Goodbye.